Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I'm here with Marc Cameron, who is a thriller writer. And actually, I'd like you to tell us a little bit for readers who are unfamiliar with your work. I would like you to describe what you write.
Wow, that's a pretty wide gamut. I write three series. I started out writing traditional Western novels, and then moved
Really?
into under the name Mark Henry, Mark with a K, Henry. I was still with the U.S. Marshals at the time, so I used that particular pen name. But I moved into thrillers, adventure, thriller, suspense type books. The first series that I started and actually got traditionally, published with Kensington in New York is the Jerico Quinn thriller
Hmm.
series about a motorcycle riding linguist OSI agent. There's 9 of those, and then in 2016 I was asked by the Tom Clancy estate and Putnam Publishing to continue the Jack Ryan novels that Mark Graney had been writing. He wrote 7, um, co-wrote 2 with Tom Clancy before his death, and then when Mark decided to step away, he recommended me for the job, and they looked at some of my books, and so I was asked to continue those. So I've done 4 of those. Shadow of the Dragon just came out a few months ago, and that's the newest one. And then I have another series of my own about a deputy marshal based in Alaska named Arliss Cutter, which, while not autobiographical, that's my background personally. So there's a lot of me and um, sort of jazzed up adventures from my experiences in the books.
Yeah, I was reading that you were deputy marshal. Was that, and you went all over, but mostly were you in Alaska?
I started in Texas. I was a police officer in Texas, and then started in U.S. Marshals is divided up into judicial districts. So a large state with a large population like Texas has 4. So I started in the Eastern District of Texas. Oddly enough, the Eastern District swoops around the top of Texas, and I was up by the Oklahoma border. So I was there for a number of years, and then transferred to the Panhandle of Idaho for 4 years along the Canadian border. And then for the last 15 years of my career, and the last 21 years, we've lived in Alaska, and I finished my career in the Marshal Service in Alaska.
Wow, that is amazing.
It's fun.
Um, okay, so what can readers expect from your newest book? And I believe your newest book is the one that's the Arliss Cutter book, Bone Rattle, that's coming out in April.
Yeah, so Arliss Cutter is a character. I actually thought of the Arliss Cutter books years ago, like 20 years ago, um, when I was sent down as part of a tactical man tracking team and fugitive team for the Marshal Service in Alaska. And I've maybe been here a year and a half, and I was sent down with some other members of the task force to track a fugitive that had allegedly chopped another guy's head off and fled into the woods on Prince of Wales Island near Sitka, where we talked about earlier, near Ketchikan, actually. And so we spent about 3 or 4 days down there, probably 4 days, better part of a week, tracking this guy. Eventually found him. Um, but spending all that time in those old growth forests and talking to the Alaska Native folks down there in Klawock and Craig and some of the other villages, and it just fascinated me. And I saw that was a setting that was, coming from Texas is where I grew up, and then I'd always wanted to live in the far north. It was just since I read books as a kid, Robert Service and Jack London, I just always wanted to move north. And so I saw that was going to be a good place to set a book, but sort of tucked it away, and actually wrote a novel and sent it off through my agent, and nobody was interested in Alaska at that point. But you know how many books and movies and reality shows are about Alaska now. So the Arliss Cutter books are about a supervisory deputy U.S. Marshal who's from Florida, So he's got these Southern roots. He's got something in his past. He's former military. He's got something in his past that just will not let him stand for bad behavior. He's constantly kind of on the verge of getting fired because he won't put up with a bully. And so I wouldn't say that he uses unnecessary force, but he uses force quite often to stop somebody or to protect others who he sees as weaker. So he's moved to Alaska to help his widowed sister-in-law, who he's been in love with since he was 16, but she married his brother. So there's some of that going on there, that she's got kids and he's helping her with the kids. But and then in each and every book, the first one, Open Carry, it's down in Southeast Alaska, where I was just talking about. Stone Cross, the second book, takes place in far western Alaska, among the Yupik peoples, the indigenous peoples in western Alaska, where the Marshal Service did a lot of work when I was with them with the troopers. So we were out there and continue to be a lot in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. And then Bone Rattle takes, I try to take him to a different place. Alaska is so vast, you know, it covers up, if you were to superimpose the state of Alaska on top of the continental United States, it covers up most of the middle of the United States, from, you know, Montana down to Arizona, with the Southeast Alaska going over into the top of Florida. So it's huge. And most people see it as a little postage stamp size state down by Hawaii on the map, because it's, you know, they just don't ever see how big we actually are, because we don't fit. And so I like to explore the different geographical locations, the different cultures, because the different native cultures really affect the culture of that part of the state. So in Bone Rattle, I go back down to Southeast Alaska. I take Arliss and his partner Lola Ta'ariki, who's a South Pacific islander, a Cook Islander. And a lot of people that don't come to Alaska don't realize there are quite a few South Pacific Islanders here in the Anchorage area, primarily Samoan and Tongan. But so I take them back down to Southeast Alaska, and this one takes place in deep abandoned gold mines and bad politicians, and just a really fun book to research, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, you must have done a lot of research on your books.
Yes.
What was your favorite research story?
Goodness, you know, they're endless. For the Tom Clancy books, I get to go on, you know, fly in military aircraft and ride on military vessels. For the Arliss Cutter books, much of the research along the way has been things I've drawn from my life. But for instance, in Bone Rattle, I'd gone down and I knew that I wanted it to have to do with, you know, corrupt politicians and big business and a homicide and a, you know, it always has to be something, it has to begin with something that's a real duty of a deputy U.S. Marshal, because deputy U.S. Marshals don't normally investigate murders. They hunt fugitives. That's state and local people, and if it's on a federal, like a native land or something like that, it would be the FBI. But I always put Cutter and his partner where they're in a position or a situation where they have to assist. So I'd gone down to Juneau, and I was chatting with a friend of mine, and he's actually a longtime friend of mine, a guy that he's my jiu-jitsu sensei, helps me out with the fight scenes, my former partner with the Marshal Service. And his sister-in-law was there, and she had just gotten back from a hike where they'd gone into an abandoned gold mine. And she said, you ought to get in touch with this friend of mine and he'll take you. And so I went with this friend. He introduced me to another friend. This group called Juneau's Hidden History, which Juneau's our capital, and it's isolated in that you can only get to the capital of Alaska by boat or plane. You can't drive there. So it makes for a really unique flavor and a lot of a lot of conspiracy theories because the politicians are sort of cloistered away down there. So these folks from Juneau's Hidden History, in particular Brian Weed and his wife, took me down into basically the bowels of the earth under Juneau, and we
Wow.
hiked these long gold mines with submerged tunnels with crystal clear water and stalagmites of stuff, or stalactites of minerals dripping off and some of these tunnels are from these mines were from the early 1900s. So pretty interesting stuff, really eye-opening, and many of those excursions ended up directly in the book. The settings are quite directly into the book.
Wow. So did you have a lot of, did you do a lot of research that didn't get into the books as
Oh,
well?
always. Yeah, that's a really good question, Selena. There's I think writers have a tendency to kind of go down these rabbit holes of research and just come
Yes.
up with reams of. In fact, I can reach right next to me right here and pick up paper. I've got 6 of these right next to me. They're just full of research for the book that comes out after. I'm just finishing up the 4th Arliss Cutter now. It's called Cold Snap, and there's no way I can put all that in. It would be force feeding stuff I find cool into the reader, and readers don't like that. So, but I have to know it to write the background, and so yeah, tons of stuff that doesn't end up in the books.
So what was the biggest challenge in writing and putting out your latest book?
The biggest challenge in both the finishing up Bone Rattle and Shadow of the Dragon, because I finished Bone Rattle and then started Shadow of the Dragon, was probably the lack of the ability to travel. But with COVID, I do a lot of travel, and so I'd intended to go back down to Juneau a couple more times and do quite a bit of travel. And then
Yeah.
with Shadow of the Dragon, I had the Tom Clancy book that came out in November. I had trips planned to be on a submarine, 2 submarines down on the East Coast, icebreaker, trips out to a offshore gas well, um, several trips with the military and other folks, and none, with COVID, none of that happened. So everything had to be done on the phone. My follow-up trips for Bone Rattle had to be done, on the phone and research through the internet, and so that that's, I think everybody in this particular time with the pandemic is having a different sort of the same kind of problem, having to realign the way we do things.
Yeah, it's very difficult right now to do any kind of traveling. Yeah.
Yeah, I would much rather be in your store right now chatting with you than talking over Zoom, but it's
I
just
know,
not
that would be
happening for a
great.
while. Yeah, someday.
That would be great to have you in our store. Is there any particular character that you love, or which character did you love or hate the most when you're writing?
In the Arliss Cutter books, I'm not much of a smiler, and so I identify with Arliss. But really, Arliss harkens back to his grandfather a lot. His name he goes by the name Grumpy because when Arliss was a little boy, he couldn't say Grandpa, and he just called him Grumpy. And so I probably identify with Grumpy more than anybody else in the books. Even though he doesn't get much page time, just more in memories because he's passed on. But I have 5 grandkids of my own, and I identify with him. Of all the characters that get excuse me, a lot of page time, Lola Tariki is probably my favorite. The Cook Islander. She's kind of a young upstart. My wife and I travel to the Cook Islands in the South Pacific every year, absent COVID, and spend a couple of months there writing. And we have good friends there. And that character is based on many of those really strong Polynesian, strong-willed and physically strong Polynesian women that we've gotten to know over the years.
So do your characters, are your characters really based on people you know?
You know, I think they're inspired by people I know, but not any one. Like I couldn't pick out a Lola Ta'ariki or a Arliss Cutter. It would be, I know half a dozen really strong, or even more than that, really strong Polynesian women that I've sort of, and not and deputy marshals that I've known, female deputy marshals, and I've just picked and chosen little bits and pieces of personality and turned them into Lola. My wife says that every female character I write in the books, the villains and the good guys, are all sort of based on her in one mood or another. So
Well,
she's
that's
probably
good.
right. Probably right.
So what can we expect from you in the near future?
Wow. So I finished Cold Snap. I'm just editing it now. It's done. And I've already started the synopsis and been in plotting talks for the next Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan. So over the next year, basically the Bone Rattle will come out in April. I will finish the Jack Ryan in July. It's called Chain of Command. That will come out in July, and then I'll finish that in July. That'll come out in November. Cold Snap will come out in April, and we'll just kind of continue on that way. Should have another Jericho coming out late next year, and then more of everything. Just I used to think that when I would see my books on the shelf in an airport, that I would, have a sailboat and be sort of kicking back and, working, write 500 words a day and be artsy, but it's a job and I love it. It's an absolutely incredible job and I'm fortunate to have it, but I treat it like a job and get up in the morning and write and have lunch and then write, research. And I have to do that to write 2 books a year.
I was just going to ask you how many books you write a year.
Yeah, it averages out to be 2 a year, and I try to keep them separate. There's always publicity for one when I'm working on another, and generally speaking, like I'll be talking about you're the first bookstore to interview me about Bone Rattle, so which is great. Generally, people will start interviewing me a little later, and so I will be talking about Bone Rattle while I'm in the middle of working on the next Tom Clancy and doing a synopsis for the editors for the next Cutter. And so although I don't write the bones of the stories at the same time, there's always work to be done for some other story. And often the one that I'm like, Bone Rattle is, by the time it comes out, I'll have written 2 other books. So,
do you work on more than one book at the same time?
Not too much. Mostly I try to keep them separated, but the publicity and stuff like that I do. But as far as writing a chapter of one book in the morning and a chapter another, my brain would have a cramp if I tried to do that. It's too, although it's become easier because I really feel like I know the characters better. And, when I do, sometimes when I first started writing the Jack Ryans, I was just coming off writing a Jericho every 8 months. And sometimes I'd write Jack or I'd write Jericho when I meant Jack. And I wasn't thinking of Jericho, but my brain just said, oh, there's a J name, Jericho. And, so I don't want too much of that. I don't want any of that to actually end up on the page.
Do you think you might write a new series, a different type of series?
That's a really good question. And the answer is absolutely. I've got so many, it all depends on reader interest and where I can take the characters to where at some point, especially a series like Jericho or Arliss, those characters have to arc. They have to
Right.
make some sort of movement. And if they just hang out in one spot too long, then it gets dangerous, and you maybe jump the shark a little bit to keep people interested. So yeah, I have several ideas. It's just a matter of time to write them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. So what is your favorite part of being a writer and of the whole writing and publishing process?
You know, I when I was young, I used to read, like high school age. I used to read about the Algonquin Round Table. Dorothy Parker and James Thurber and um, Benchley and those guys. And I used to think, wow, that would be so cool to sit, or the left bank in Paris of the Hemingway and
Mm,
everybody chatting with having their little artsy author talks. And um, I used to sort of have dreams of being part of that kind of writer group. And so, although I'm not really a much of a socializer, the COVID lockdowns have been okay with me as far as being a hermit in my office writing. I need to go out and do research, but being alone is much easier for me than it is for my wife. But I do like a couple of times a year going out to a writers conference and linking up with my friends, sitting around, in the hotel bar and just listening to their stories and trading. You'll never believe what email I got from a reader, you know, stories and stuff like that. And it just, and listening to to the, when I admit that I don't get back online and listen to my own interviews very often, but I do listen to my friends' interviews, and that's just fascinating to me to hear other authors. So I really enjoy that. I enjoy feeling the going to New York, sitting down to dinner with my agent and my editor and my wife, and feeling like, wow, this is like one of those guys I read about in high school. I enjoy that writer feeling.
so, are there any groups or clubs or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers?
Well, here in Alaska, we have the Alaska Writers Guild. It's um, very busy and helping promote, and have a great conference every year, helping promote new writers. Um, I'm part of the International Thriller Writers, and also I attend VoucherCon every
Mm,
year, those two conferences. And I wish I could attend more. It's just writing this many books, I can't. And really, truth be told, I have to pick one or the other every year because I just do not have time to pick up and go hang out for a week, although I'd like to. But VoucherCon, ITW, Thriller Fest is the conference, and those are both. I'm a big proponent of conferences. People will um, beginning writers, I shouldn't say beginning writers, but writers who want to are in the point where they at the point in their writing where they want to be published. They may have been writing for years, but they're have something done that they want to put to the market. Um, they often ask me, how do I get a agent? How do I get an editor? What's the trick? And there is no trick. It's really lightning in a bottle. You have to line up with some agent editor that really likes your stuff. But the best way that I've seen to do it is to go to a conference and meet people, sit down across the table, and let them look you in the eye while you tell them why you're the author, why you're the person to write this particular story. And it's really, I wouldn't say it's the only way to do it, but it's sure the best way to do it, in my opinion, because it's a people business, and it's really a
mhm.
small New York is a small place when it comes to the writing
Yeah.
group.
So that would be like your best piece of advice for other writers.
Well, I think so. I really am a proponent of conferences. My I always give folks two pieces of advice: go to conferences, and the other one is get your nose out of your phone, get out of social media, not stop social media, but get, I mean, which would not probably not be a bad idea. But as a writer, as writers, I can't speak to all writers, but I have a tendency, if I write some, because as a writer, I'll get on my posts and edit them and go back and read them 5 times before I, because I'm writing something. And if I write a couple of paragraphs, and then I've used up that much writing energy that could have gone into my work in progress on some snarky Facebook post or Twitter post or whatever. So I tell people, maybe focus on the writing, focus on writing a book instead of promoting your book right away. And really in my experience, the best promotion for a book is things like we're doing right now, getting to know independent bookstores and writing another book. That's every time when I write a new book, I see a tick up in sales of my old books, much more than if I write a bunch of posts on social media pleading with people to buy my book.
Okay. What has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Well, the Jerico Quinn books I had tons of adventures as a deputy marshal on the Yukon River. My wife and I went from school to school on the Kobuk River, which is in the Northwest Arctic borough of Alaska, going from village to village. And I utilize a lot of those experiences in these books. But for the Jerico books, he rides a motorcycle. I ride motorcycles. My youngest son and I, he's just about to turn 30, but several years ago, I think 4 years ago, we rode our motorcycles from Texas back up to Alaska, and it took us about 9 days. We took our time, and I used a lot of those experiences in the Jerico books, and that's probably my favorite adventure of my lifetime, to spend time. It's one of those that I doubt I'll ever be able, because he's busy. He's got a kid of his own now, a wife and a child, and his time. And he's he's an Anchorage police officer. He's a busy man, and he doesn't have time for the old man to spend a week and a half riding through the Yukon. So great adventure.
That sounds like it must have been so much fun.
It was incredible.
Oh, great. All right. What is the one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Wow. I don't know. I'm not really I guess I'm kind of I'm a big talker. I love to tell stories and all of that. People know that, but really I'm pretty shy. I don't, I've told you that I like to go to these conferences and stuff. Some people are really jazzed by big meetings and parties and things like that. And I like, for something about me compels me to get up and tell a story and be the life of the party, but I'm absolutely drained afterwards. I don't get I don't get energy from that. I give it up. So it's pretty difficult for me in the long run. I'll spend a week recuperating after something like that. Even though I enjoy it, it's pretty draining.
Yeah. What question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
You've done a great job. You ask about the writing life, and I enjoy talking about my books, but I always like it when we talk about the writing life, the life of a writer, because the books are the books, and I can tell people about them, but really they ought to come see you and buy one to see what they're about, to read one. But the life of a writer, I mean, when I read about, and I'm certainly not putting myself on a plane with these folks, but when I read about Faulkner or Hemingway or Jack London, I don't necessarily read about a particular book they wrote. I read about their
Mhm.
life and
Yeah.
how they lived, and um, that's what's interesting to me. So I enjoy, and I hope that I can pass on some of the interesting little things. When my wife and I go to the South Pacific, we talk to a lot of people about that because they see us as, it sounds richer than it is. We go to the South Pacific and live for 3 months every year, but we have friends there that give us a really great deal on a place to live. It has no air conditioning, and but it's a great place. I mean, I really can't badmouth it too much because it's a beautiful location right off the beach and the lagoon, and but it's not like a 5-star luxury hotel. It's just a really nice home that we rent. But we end up talking to a lot of people because we stay for 2 or 3 months. And so we meet people that come for a week at a time, and they'll fly in and fly out and fly in and fly out. And, invariably it's a small island. And so people find out I'm a writer, and I'll walk on the beach and they'll chat with me. But we always talk more about the writing life um, and people than we do about my specific books.
That's good. And what are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time for your non-writing hobbies and things that you love?
Well, I like motorcycles. I like shooting. I like going to the range and shooting. My son and I built a couple of long range rifles to shoot way out. A couple of years ago, my wife and I sail. We sail in out of Seward, Alaska, south of us here. Um, and I just like being outside. I like to fish. My wife actually fills the freezer with salmon. She does most of the fishing in our household. But I try to treat this like a job, and I'm not very good at it. I will. Um, it's hard to not write right now because I have contracts and a lot of possibilities, but I should, if I did it right, I would actual take vacations, like write for a given amount of time and then treat it as my government job and just say, all right, I'm going to take this 2 weeks and go on a motorcycle trip. But I never end up doing that. If I'm going to go on a motorcycle trip, I pen with me and stop at 2 p.m. and write in the afternoon, and only ride for half a day or sail for part of the day and then sit on deck and write while somebody else. So writing is one of those things where it's kind of a disease. It's just, you have to do it. So no matter what I'm doing, I have a notepad with me or laptop or something.
Mhm. Um, okay, now what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
Well, I write pretty much anywhere. I have a small office at home. You're pretty much looking at it. It's a bedroom and a big whiteboard with a bunch of secret stuff I can't show you right now because it's the next
Oh,
Tom
darn.
Clancy book. But I have, if I'm writing about a certain kind of weapon, I usually have that weapon on the table. Um, I can't. I don't. I might have a certain kind of knife, or there's a whole bucket of swords and stuff and a bull whip and things like that. I'm just it's the kind of office where my grandsons like to come in and goof. I have to hide all the really sharp stuff, and then they can play with the other stuff. Um, but I try to write anywhere. I might write here for a while, and then I might go out to our living room where the fireplace is, and it's supposed to get down to 1 degree tonight, so, and colder tomorrow night. So I'll probably do a lot of writing out by the fireplace, and it's cozy, and we have a picture window with some bird feeders, so we'll watch the chickadees and the nuthatches and write. So I just try to write everywhere. My writing space might be a camp chair with my tent and motorcycle behind me, or just anywhere.
You can basically write if in a large group, like in a cafe or whatever.
Yeah, I have done a lot of writing in hotel lobbies. In fact, sometimes when I was still with the Marshals, I would get to I'd go on assignment somewhere, and I just made it a point to not turn on the television. But sometimes alone in a hotel room and trying to concentrate and write, and hotel rooms have that kind of a cleanser smell into them, and I would just go take my laptop and go down to the lobby where there was nobody knew me or was talking to me, but there was stuff sort of clattering around me, and right down there a lot, or right on airplanes. I had a college professor tell me when I was a freshman in college. He probably saw how I bounced around concentration wise, but he was my theater. I'd majored in theater, and it might be something that nobody knows about me, but
Yeah.
yeah, I met my wife in theater department. In fact, she thought when we got married that I was going to be a drama professor and a novelist, and then I sprung it on her that I wanted to be a cop. But this drama theater professor kind of pulled me aside, and he said, you will never reach your full potential, Mark, until you learn to utilize those 15-minute segments of time that everybody else wastes. You got to really learn to use those. And I was 18, but I wrote that in my journal. I'm a big journaler, and I wrote that in my journal. I really tried to live by that, where if I'm sitting waiting for an airplane, especially when I was working full time in writing, because I didn't retire until the second Jerico Quinn book came out. But I could never write on duty, but I could write when I was traveling somewhere, or when I went, on assignment. And so if I was waiting for a plane, I would write. Even if it was, 20 minutes, I would write instead of scrolling through my phone. Now, admittedly, we only had Blackberries back then. We didn't have cool iPhones that like we have now. I might have been more tempted now, but
Wow. So, and when you're writing, do you prefer silence, or do you must prefer music or
no,
noise or something?
that's it. Kind of an interesting thing about me. I don't listen to music when I write unless it's just, I can't listen to music with lyrics. I get too caught up in the lyrics. I listen to like movie themes or something like that sometimes while I write. Mostly I just like either silence or just stuff going on around me in the house. I always am more productive when my wife is home puttering around, or if we have one grandson that lives up here, and if he's up here out playing and talking to Nana, then I can come in here and just kind of work away. And I I like stuff going on around me, but I don't wear earphones with music in them. I would find myself caught up in the music, I think.
And a lot of times writers have furry or animals that can either help or hinder them when they're writing. Do you have any of those?
We had we've had blue heeler dogs our whole life, Australian cattle dogs. Shouldn't say our whole life, but my wife and I's whole married life, we raised them for a while. We had two females and a male, and we lived out in the country, and so we've had, I don't know, half a dozen or more blue heelers over the years, and we had one up here for years, and she would sit She's passed away now, but she would sit with um, her jowls on my foot, and while I was editing, and I would read everything out loud, and I could kind of gauge her. I don't know if if she was just sort of tuned into me, but if it didn't work, she'd kind of lift her head and look at me. And so she listened to everything that I wrote for several years, up until I think the maybe the fourth Jericho novel. Um, but then now we travel so much, it's a constant it's a constant struggle with me not to get another dog. Um,
Mhm.
I belong to a Alaska Blue Healers Facebook page, and I get on there and look and wish for. And my son and his wife have a couple of dogs, and so they bring them over and assuage that need once in a while.
Uh, yeah. Do you have any favorite foods or drinks that you have to have with you when you're writing?
that's a that's a good question. I would have said a year ago, I would have said, and everybody that knew me would have said Dr. Pepper, but I've sort of sworn off. I'm trying to get off caffeine and just see if I can get in a little better shape the older I get. So I haven't had any Dr. Pepper in way too long, but I love me a good glass of Dr. Pepper, and that's my treat. Being from Texas, I think it's in my blood. Um, but my wife keeps me um, supplied in grapes. I love to snack on grapes, and but she's an incredible cook, so I normally just snack throughout the day, try to eat healthy, and then eat whatever incredible meal she made polenta and shrimp last night. And I mean, she makes bouillabaisse, and she cooks some really good food during this pandemic. We're eating very well, embarrassingly. So I haven't we haven't been to a restaurant in nearly a year, and I don't miss it. As long as she's cooking like that, it's pretty incredible.
Wow, that's great. I know a lot of people have taken on cooking during this pandemic.
Mhm.
They've done a lot of it. Well, actually, I just have two more questions for you, and I wanted to find out where people can find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester. And I did want to put in a little plug here that anybody can buy books from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, or all of your books. And we're at 65 James Street in Worcester. And you can buy the books by sending us email at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. So that's the little plug here. Um,
Good.
but where can people find your books other than Annie's?
Well, just really anywhere books are sold. I just saw a British publisher, and now I can't remember I think it's called Canelo, um, is marketing them in England now, and they're translated into several different languages, and including Czech, I believe, most recently. But really anywhere online. I like to see people using independent bookstores. Um, I mean, as a writer, um, I want, wherever anybody wants. I don't want to diss even the giants, because that's, we want people to buy my books. But I do like to see independent bookstores be successful, because I spent so much time, and still do, in independent bookstores growing up, and uh, through the years. Whenever I travel, that's sort of my fun thing to do, is go see what bookstores in the area, and go chat with folks, and just see what they're, because I don't have to tell you, but it's a labor of love to be involved in a small, or even large, even like a Powell's bookstore in Portland. Bookstores are it's just a cool kind of person that runs a bookstore. So I enjoy being around him.
Yeah, I love bookstores, obviously.
Yeah, me too.
So next, then the last question is, how can we follow your work and your awesomeness?
Well, I just said to you, don't to that I would tell everybody to get off of social media, but I do have social media. I'm not particularly active on it anymore. I try to keep my posts to maybe once a week, sometimes less. Um, and usually they're about my grandson or my pretty wife or something like. If I have a new book cover coming out or something, I'll post that. But Marc Cameron, Marc Cameron Books. I think Marc Cameron Author on Facebook, um, and then Marc Cameron Books on Instagram, and then Marc Cameron 1 on Twitter. So I just posted some Northern Lights from last night. We had some incredible aurora borealis last night. So yeah, Marc Cameron Books at Yahoo is my email, and I love to hear from readers. So
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
thank you,
Um,
Selena.
and I hope that someday you'll be able to come over and see our store. It would be
Yeah, I'd like
wonderful.
to. I would really like to. We'd like to get to that part of the country.
Yeah, that would be great. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to stop recording now. Hang on.